But Lance, we got a phone call on the line. I believe it's from a Gary here in Bay County. Gary, go ahead with your question.
Good evening, guys. Real quick question. If I've got more than 2 or 3 vehicles, is it worth my time to stack those policies? Because you have a lot of people with the uninsured motorists, they don't have the coverage.
Very good question, Gary.
Doing that?
Yes, and look, first, Lance, for Gary's benefit, and I think it sounds like Gary knows a little bit what he's talking about there. He's already talking about the stack coverage. A lot of people don't even know that's an option. But uninsured motorist coverage is something for folks that have watched this show frequently that we discuss. It is a form of coverage that you can purchase to protect yourself when the people that injure you do not have enough insurance, which is very important in the state of Florida because most of the folks that are driving around do not have adequate coverage to protect you if they harm you. The issue then becomes if you have multiple vehicles on that policy, does it make sense to buy stacking versus unstacking? Describe for the audience what that is, Lance.
So the basic thing you would get with stacking coverage is each vehicle is going to have a certain amount of coverage on it. So you're going to have, generally it's going to be the same amount on each vehicle. So you may have $10,000 per person, $20,000 per occurrence in uninsured motorist coverage. But if you have stacking coverage and you've got 3 vehicles, all 3 have that same coverage on there, you're actually eligible to collect up to $30,000 and $60,000 per person per occurrence. In addition to that, you would also have broader coverage. So there's situations where if you had a non-stacking policy, for instance, if you had a vehicle that was not insured on that policy that you owned, and you happened to be in that vehicle and you had non-stacking coverage, you actually wouldn't be entitled to your uninsured motorist coverage off of your other policy that didn't include that vehicle, or motorcycles, and there's quite a few different areas where the non-stacking coverage does not provide you with as broad of coverage as the stacking coverage would. Being in somebody else's vehicle, oftentimes that would make a difference, or being potentially out of state. There's a lot of scenarios where even if you don't necessarily increase your limits by stacking, because you can opt to have stacking coverage and just maintain those same limits, but even if you don't increase the actual overall limits, you may still be better off having stacking coverage because it's going to provide you with coverage in more situations than it would. You know, the non-stacking, the basic would be if you're in your vehicle that has non-stacking coverage, you're going to get the coverage from that vehicle. If you're in a situation where you have stacking coverage on vehicles, you can be in other vehicles that aren't that vehicle and still be eligible for coverage.
Your mom's, your friends, you name it, and it travels with you. But the short answer is, you buy insurance, protects you from risk. One of the riskier things we do in any situation is get out and drive around, especially our area. There's a lot of folks that we have a lot of construction. There's a lot of tourists, so you want to protect yourself. And so the risk-benefit analysis weighs heavily in favor of A, in the first instance, buying that coverage, and B, maximizing the availability at it. From a standpoint of affordability to your benefit, it's one of the best buys that you can have out there. So I would strongly encourage it. Discuss it with your agent, look at the proper pricing to make sure it makes sense for your situation, but it's definitely something that you need to talk about. And it's so important that the legislature has mandated that if you're not going to have it, you have to sign a form rejecting it. And if they do not have the form, that is your agent, your insurance, via your insurance company, if they don't have that form in their file, then you have stacking coverage at the limits of what you have on the vehicle for bodily injury coverage. And so there's been several situations I know that we've had, both of us, where the situation looked like the individual was hit by someone that did not have any insurance. We look at the premiums deck page that they brought us in when we signed them up, and it shows they didn't purchase uninsured motorist coverage. But when we request the certified copy of the policy, they can't produce that selection rejection form, and then they have, in essence, force-placed uninsured motorist coverage stacking. It can make a huge difference, and it's saved many, many people. Let's don't have to get to that situation, but that's how important it is that the legislature has deemed it necessary that you reject it in writing in order to not have it. So great question, Gary, and I hope that everybody will look at their own policies, because a lot of times people don't look at their policies until they've been in an accident. And that's one thing I like to do with individuals when they come in, is I ask them, do you know what your coverage is? And very rarely does anyone know that answer. Full coverage is a quite a frequent answer. And just for the folks that haven't heard us discuss that before, Lance, what is the real definition of full coverage?
I mean, it would depend on who you ask, but as far as the bank and the insurance company often are concerned, it's basically just going to be that you have comprehensive coverage for your property damage and collision coverage for your property damage. So basically your car is taken care of if you're involved in a crash. But full coverage to us, you know, you have bodily injury liability coverage, you have uninsured motorist coverage, you have personal injury protection coverage, med pay coverage.
Well, you can buy coverage as much as you would like depending on your situation. And a lot of times people will use the term full coverage just to mean the minimum legal coverage, which is just property damage, liability coverage, and PIP. So be careful with that terminology and make sure you know what you're getting.